And
Yeah, go on. Let them in. Let them in. 50 is a good number. All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the eighth webinar, technical webinar for the Digital Traffic Orders project. Should you wish, the previous webinars are available on our YouTube's channel. Do check that out. I think if you just put in DFT Street Manager YouTube's, you'll find that channel. Do like and subscribe. I'm trying to get up to 100,000 views on that channel. Upsettingly, my son hit that mark on his own YouTube channel, and he's 10 years old. So, help me out here, guys. Okay, we have an exciting agenda for you today. I'll introduce the cats as they come on stage. But first off, without further ado, let's hear from your friend of mine, ladies and gentlemen. It's our engagement manager, Gareth Tilley.
Thank you, Paul. That's very kind. Very good introduction as ever. Thanks again for everyone for attending. We're really pleased with the turnout for this webinar. So, and it's significantly more than we've had previously. So we just wanted to do a quick introduction for people who haven't necessarily been on one of these before, just explaining the purpose of the webinars and just where you can get a bit more information as well. So just a reminder of the service, I'm sure people are very, very aware of this. It's an API first service. Essentially, we're getting the TROs from the traffic regulation authorities, as we call them in our terminology in D-TRO, and that's going into our central database. And then there's an API for data consumers as well. And they're the end users, effectively, of the data. And we've got a broad range of different companies consuming that data already, which is great from our beta in production environment. So we've got API first service. That's supported by the data specification. It's got a lot of components, but key elements of that include the data model, JSON schema, and example files, which I know a lot of you are using off our GitHub site. The main purpose of the webinars is very much around the evolution of that specification. And we get feedback from a lot of different sources for those changes. Our GitHub's very active, and people ask for new elements to be added into the data model, for example, on GitHub. We're doing a lot of user research, and thanks again for those who've participated in that. We're doing some user research at the moment, for example, on error reporting for the service. So I know some people on this call will have been interviewed about that recently. We've got one-to-one sessions in, we've got regular sessions with key stakeholders as well. And then we've got conferences. So if you want to see us in person, we like to attend as many conferences as we can, really, to keep the engagement up. But that gives a flavour of the technical webinars and the kind of key priority purposes as we see it. I just wanted to talk through then some of the communication channels we've got. The main one for technology and the main one for the data specification is the GitHub. That's an open forum. People can post on there. Everyone can see the posts. They can contribute. We do calls for information and calls for feedback regularly on GitHub. And thanks again for everyone who contributes in that forum. The other thing, as Paul was saying, we've got a YouTube channel as well. So all these webinars, we've done the technical webinars. If you've missed any and would like to look back at old editions, as well as our webinars, which are for everyone, the ones without a kind of real technical focus, they're on our YouTube channel as well. And they're all accessible on the Street Manager YouTube channel, and they're also available through the Transport Technology Forum as well. That links to the playlist too. So I just wanted to set the scene, as I said, there's a lot of new people to this call today, and outline some of the comms. Back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Gareth. A couple of people in the chat saying they can't hear, but most people, or no one else is saying it. Sorry about that. Ironically, we have had some problems this week with Gareth speaking too softly and having a cheap set of earphones. So he's coming through loud and clear for me this time. talking of coming through loud and clear, someone who has no problems making himself known. Ladies and gentlemen, it's John Cooper, our product owner, with an update from the previous webinars.
Thanks, Paul, and hi, everyone. Yes, it's been a very big week on the service because we received our 10,000th D-TRO in, I believe, yesterday. It was very well received. It was in Cambridgeshire, a temporary road closure with a diversion route. So that's a really good thing because we've been on a long route through thinking that 100 was a big number, then 1,000, 5,000, and now we're up to mighty 10,000. Of course, in the overall context of what we see the service eventually having, it is but a drop in the ocean, but it's a good start, and we will look to go bigger and bolder in the coming months. So let's go on to a bit of a further update, and this leads into some of the stuff that colleagues will be talking about later in the webinar as well. We are launching a new version 3.4, and there will be more on the detail of that coming up. There's an integration environment launch planned for Monday. This will be 4 weeks ahead of the production launch on towards the end of April on the 28th. This is so that developers can get their systems attuned to what will be required for the new release ahead of the production launch. Following on from that, we are planning to launch the real public beta in May 25. This is obviously another big step forward for the project and will lead to the increase in the volumes as we accept anyone and everyone as a publisher to join in, and also new data consumers. Gareth has mentioned this already, but GitHub is still going well. We have the one DFT GitHub with issues and technical documentation. There are 2 further PA digital GitHubs, which we will be migrating over to DFT in time for the full public beta. So everything will be on the DFT side of the house. We have daily triage on all issues received either by GitHub or from the mailbox. So this helps us to keep on top of what the issues that are being reported are, and to react and do fixes, or else build things into the backlog for future release. Another thing that you no doubt will have seen, the consultation closed last week. This is now with the policy team to be assimilated and considered and all written up. We don't yet have dates for the next stage, but we will keep you updated as much as we can going forward. On our side as well, we are working on yet another update to the FAQ, no doubt to include questions received in this webinar, and we will keep that updated on an ongoing basis. We do have a further communications portal planned for when we go into public beta. We'll bring everything together under an umbrella site that will link more cohesively to all the GitHubs, videos, supporting information and documentation, so it's more readily found in one place. More on that as we get to develop it. That's all on this slide. What is next up? Is this me, Paul, or is this going over to John Harrod Booth?
Well, I do believe that this is my opportunity, John Cooper, to introduce the man himself, John Harrod Booth. John, why don't you just mention who you are and what you're doing on the project for the benefit of any new joiners? And also, John is then going to pass over, it's an all-star cast this week, to our lead developer, Ben Pawley. So it's very exciting. I will leave John to do that.
Okay, thank you everybody. I'm John Harrod Booth. I'm an independent consultant based in Somerset. I've been supporting DFT through a series of the D-TRO projects from 2018, and I'm really focused on the data model and data specification. And so when you raise comments, queries, requests for additions, these sorts of things, they all end up on my desk. It's not me who makes the decision, but they all come through me. So, it's my job to really talk to you about what we're doing technically. We are, as John said, we're about to release version 3.4. And 3.4 is quite a step from the previous version. So we've spent quite a lot of time trying to improve the validation that is in the system. And addressing several bug fixes that have been spotted and reported primarily through the GitHub resource. And part of that is, there was a comment coming from several software developers who said, you seem a bit inconsistent in the casing you use within the data schema, and that obviously feeds from the data model and feeds across into the data itself. And so we looked at that, and what we're doing is adjusting. So 3.4 will use camelCase. So all objects and attributes within the schema use the form that camelCase is written on this slide, which is a lowercase initial letter and then uppercase for words within the tag. So we're introducing that, and that will then apply from this version forward. I have to say, the use of camelCase and other versions is not strictly standardized. It has communities of interest, but we've adopted something which we think is probably in the broadest community. As part of the program, we will be deprecating older schema versions. I'll show you that on the next slide. And that's really to try and ensure that we keep as few versions live as we can. Why? Because the data consumers really have to be able to consume records coming in against any of the versions. And obviously, if we have lots of versions, that's not helpful for the data consumers. We are also looking at, and as John said, we've just passed 10,000. So we've got 10,000 records in the production system at the moment. And we will be looking at a strategy about how we handle the process of updating those older D-TRO records. I'm not saying legacy, I'm saying they are already in the production system, but those that are against older legacy schema versions to later versions. And it's a point of discussion, and we're very keen to discuss out with you about how that strategy should be done. So that's part of the user outreach program. But it is something that we're starting to focus on. And then, as you'll see on the next slide, we're intending to move towards a release which is approximately every 6 months from here on. So, capturing where we are at the moment, if I work my way down, you can see that we've actually got 4 versions that are live in production, schema versions that are live in production, and 5 that are in integration. And what we're going to do is to start to tidy those up. So as 3.4 comes into integration at the end of this month, we will start to remove some of the older versions from both integration and production environments. 3.2.1 and 3.2.3, we haven't seen any new production record versions of those for some time, so we don't believe anybody's using them. So they will be retired. It says the 21st of March, which is obviously in the past, but I believe 3.2.1 was retired on the 21st of March, and 3.2.3, I believe, was retired yesterday. So I will make sure the slide is correct if it's out for general distribution. Then at the end of April, we will take away 3.2.4, which is quite widely used at the moment. And then at a time to be decided around the end of May, we will take away the other 2 versions, 3.3.0 and 3.3.1, which would leave us with ultimately 3.4 being the only live version in both production and integration from May onwards until our next update, which is intended to be in the autumn. We would then go into an approach which says we would release new versions at approximately a 6-month interval. So we would expect the next version to come out in the autumn of 2025. Let's call it 3.5, and we would retain 3.4 for about 6 months after that, until we're in a position where there's stability around the new version. Obviously, there may be a need to introduce minor versions for bug fixes and the like, but we'll deal with those as they appear. But we're trying to get to a more stabilized overall situation. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've got 3 things to talk about. Ben is going to talk about the first 2, and then I'll deal with the latter one. So I'll hand over to Ben at this point.
Thank you very much, John. Yes, so I think John has already done a great job of describing the need for introducing camelCase into version 3.4 and onwards. So this is something that we've implemented. Submitting against schema version 3.4 mandates that the payloads must conform to the camelCase naming convention. So that's typically a lowercase letter of the first word and uppercase letters for first letters for subsequent words as part of the whole string. Prior to that, properties whose values were objects were required to be submitted as Pascal case, so with an uppercase first letter as well. We've improved validation of this. So for versions prior to 3.4, you're still required to submit in Pascal case, the current way that you'll be used to doing it. But going forwards, 3.4 onwards, you will be required to submit with camelCase, and you will receive appropriate validation messages if that's violated. So 3.4 onwards, case validation is actually handled by the schema itself. Before 3.4, it's all handled in the code. So the messages that you will get are slightly different based on whether you're submitting against prior to 3.4 or 3.4 onwards. Next slide, please. So that leads me on to schema validation itself. So one of the things that I think has been raised a number of times is difficulties with submitting payloads against specific schema versions and validation messages that aren't always overtly clear in what the issue is. So 3.4, we've really overhauled this, as mentioned, to help you with any sort of errors that you might see when submitting payloads, hopefully providing more useful feedback on the reasons that your submissions are not being accepted by the service. So schema validation encompasses a huge amount of validation, missing properties that are required, inclusion of additional properties that aren't required, issues with data types, formats, conditional logic, lots of things around that. There is still a requirement to do some validation in the code, particularly around things that are very complicated that cannot be captured in schema. An example of that is validating that a date is not in the future. So if you provide a date as a field, the schema can validate that your format is correct and it is indeed a date, but what it cannot do is validate that the date that you've provided is before or after a specific date. So there is still some validation happening code side, but where possible, we've moved towards a schema validation approach. Now I have a short demo to show, so I'm just going to share my screen to give you an idea of the sorts of things that you would expect to see when you're using the new changes that we've just talked about. So firstly, I hope you can see this okay. It's not too small. I don't seem to be able to zoom in, which isn't very helpful, but hopefully it shows up all right. So here I'm using Postman, an HTTP client, which is just allowing me to communicate with the service. This will probably be familiar to some developers on the call. So the payload here is against schema version 3.3.1. If I submit this, I get a successful response come back to say that my D-TRO has been submitted. If I have an issue with the casing, as we just talked about, so I've now moved to this would be a camelCase approach, but in a version that's prior to 3.4, I will receive a message that indicates that property names must conform to Pascal case name conventions, and I get a list of property names that violate that. So that's the sort of things that you'll start to see when you're using versions prior to 3.4 around casing. So if I flick to this other tab, the only difference here is I'm now submitting against 3.4. If I send this, this is successful. That's because all my property names have been turned into camelCase. If I do update this to be camelCase, I send this, I will get an error message. So this is the schema validation kicking in, telling me that property source is not defined, essentially, because this is case sensitive in terms of the schema validation. So it's allowing lowercase s through, but not uppercase s. The other sorts of things that the schema can validate against is types. So current TRA owner here is an integer. If I put it to a string and I try and submit this, I'll get an error message telling me invalid type, expected an integer but got a string. It tells me exactly where it's happening. Source.current TRA owner. So hopefully some more useful validation messages that will allow you to address any problems in payload submission. Dates is another good example. So I've got a date here. If it's an invalid format, again, I get told the string does not validate against the format date. The sorts of other things that we've included are enums. So there are many strings that have to be one of a fixed list. An example here is action type. If I change this to be something else that's not part of that list, I will again receive an error message that hopefully indicates exactly what the problem is and the path to it, so you can identify exactly where. There's various other things that I won't demonstrate. I'll just talk about very briefly. Things like minimum items in arrays. So here's a good example. Provision expects an array of objects, and there are conditions on it that say you must have at least one. If you delete this and have 0 in it, or you put too many things in it, there are some arrays that have a max limit on them. You'll receive schema validation messages to indicate that. Minimum, maximum lengths on strings, maximum numbers, minimum numbers on integers, regexes as well. So if you're submitting a payload where a specific value has to conform to a certain pattern, that is enforced in the schema as well. And lastly, there's some conditional logic as well. So when certain properties have a given value, that may mandate that another property must exist in the payload, and the schema validation handles all of that where it can, with the caveat being obviously if relationships are very complicated, it's something we might have to do in the code. So hopefully the schema validation will start to provide useful and usable error messages that help with payload submission. And yeah, you'll be able to kind of get feedback immediately of what the cause is, rather than potentially non-specific errors that might have been being delivered back before. So that's everything that I wanted to talk about. I will stop sharing. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back over to John again.
Okay, thanks, Ben. So apologies for a rather dense slide. It is a technical webinar. So this is a summarized version of the changes that are coming in with version 3.4, and I'll briefly run through them. Obviously, Ben's just been talking to you about use of camelCase and improved validation. We've had comments on GitHub that some of the API endpoints that we have put out there don't particularly seem very useful. And so having reviewed the extent to which they are used and discussed with various of the software developers, we're removing those that are not sensibly used. Third bullet, those of you who have been reviewing the secondary legislation that's proposed will note there are a number of things in there that are expected to be delivered in terms of data. Obviously, the secondary legislation doesn't yet exist, but on the basis that we're working with the latest draft that we have, and the fact that the consultation has just closed, we've had to make the judgment to include any necessary additional fields or objects that would be required to support what would go in a D-TRO record to meet the secondary legislation. So we've added in a number of different fields and different objects. So for example, we've added in a made date and a coming into force date field. We've added in capabilities to do the real-time starts and stops for TTROs where they are required to have real-time starts and stops, and a number of other things. There is a full description of these. I think I've been hoping that we would get that out before today's webinar, but it is prepared, and it may well come out later today, if not tomorrow. Next one, we've had various issues raised on GitHub, some of which have been sat around for a while because we've been waiting for an opportunity to fix them. One of the observations that we've made, so I've just picked out an example, is the ability to define the sort of no return policy that might exist for on-street parking, for example. And it was commented that this was held in the wrong piece of the model, so we've made an adjustment to address that. We've also had a number of comments, people saying, I think something's missing from one of your lists. So we've added in a selection of additional regulation types. We've added in some additional vehicle types and some additional permit types. That process will continue to be ongoing. So if you review things and you say, I don't find what I need, then please let us know, and we will review them and consider introducing them into later editions of the specification. That was actually addressing the question of the, sorry, I've gone slightly out of sequence. That was addressing the question of additional enumeration values, which is towards the bottom of the list. But there is an ability within the model to define for a certain number of the lists, the most verbose lists, you can define your own value, and the mechanism to do that wasn't fully specified in the previous version and has been addressed in this one. So there is an ability to add your own type of vehicle type, for example, or a regulation type that doesn't appear in the list. We're obviously a little bit conscious of opening that trapdoor because we could end up with lots of local variation of people describing things, and we strongly encourage you to use the standardized types that are in the model. We will certainly be keeping an eye on use of that extension mechanism, and if things are regularly being extended in the same way, then we will introduce those into the main lists. Similarly, part of the secondary legislation provides an expectation that records concerning proposed permanent TROs will also come into the D-TRO service, and the mechanism to do that again has been clarified within the specification and the technical mechanisms. We've adjusted one or two attribute data types. I only mention those because it's just worth mentioning that there are some changes. They're fully documented in the change note that will come out. And the last, which probably sounds incredibly technical, is that there was a little bit of confusion and redundancy about some of the headers that are used within the API calls. And so use of app ID and the like. So that's been clarified as well. I'm not going to go into a lower level of detail unless somebody really, really wants me to. So next slide, please. I think it's back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, JHB. Do you think, guys, we covered the question, what is the purpose of camelCase as opposed to Pascal? Now, obviously, I know the answer to that, but can we explain it for the guys if we haven't already?
Happy to give that a go. So when you're developing data models and schemas, all of them are defined in varieties of different languages, and different industries tend to use different conventions. We started off using a convention which I've used for many years and appears in many European standards, and that is camelCase. So that means that if you're defining within the data model objects, and within those objects attributes, that the object name would be camelCase and the attribute names would be camelCase. And that's just the convention that I've been used to using over many years. It was commented back by some of the data, the service providers, that this seems to be rather non-standard. We certainly did some investigation and looked at different options, and ultimately have settled on what seems to be the most widely used, which is to use camelCase, and hopefully that will remove some of the issues that we have been having. We go through a process fairly regularly of either taking comments that have come in through GitHub or in some cases direct emails into the service mailbox, or raised within some of the conversations that we regularly have with stakeholders. And we get examples, and people ask us, I'm trying to submit this and it won't work. Can you please debug it? And a lot of the issues that we were finding within the earlier versions was exactly this problem of different cases of different types of things. So we're trying to help everybody and standardize it as best we can. And ultimately, you have to make a choice.
Thanks, John. That is exactly what I would have said. Just a consistent naming convention, really, at the end of the day. Now, here's a question for us. What about no return conditions for regulations that are not permit based, e.g. free parking places? I think that's talking about no return within 1 hour and stuff like that. Any thoughts on that? That's probably for you as well, JHB.
Yep. So the adjustment we've made is within the apologies, it's going to take you into the land of assuming that you actually know the shape of the data model. We have part of the data model that deals with various conditions that might apply to a regulation, and that covers pretty much everything we can try to think of in terms of vehicle type restrictions, access restrictions, possibly emissions-based restrictions, and a wide range of other things. And some of those, of course, relate to permits. And in the model, we have general permit conditions, and then we have another one allied alongside that says subject to a fee. And matters to do with no return were in the subject to a fee object previously. So we've moved them up to being related to permits. If people can provide use cases either on GitHub or by email that show other things that need to address that sort of ability, let us know and we will try to introduce them. I suspect we might be able to do them by perhaps a slight misuse of the permit condition, but if there's other ways of doing this, then we can certainly look at introducing those.
Thank you, sir. Here's a question, and I am surprised at this one, the second part of it. Is there provision for authorities to provide timings for road closures, overnight, daytime only, all that kind of stuff? And I'm always banging on about this, aren't I? Like, the road closure that's 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. only and stuff for a building site. Henry goes on to say there doesn't seem to be an example available on GitHub. I thought there might have been, or I suppose the data model, at least JHB, must kind of set this out.
Yeah, so I think there are examples on GitHub, and I'll certainly check that. You might find there's an example there which is called more complex, and more complex actually has a whole bunch of different things in it, and within those you will find things like conditions that deal with unusual configurations of timing and these sorts of things. I'll certainly have to have a look to ensure that, but we're trying to make those sorts of examples available. The capability exists in the model, so if you are able to define a pattern, so the example I would always use is maybe you've got a regulation that applies a certain pattern of hours in a weekday, but it works differently at the weekend, but maybe it also works differently on a bank holiday. The model can quite happily support that sort of complexity. That's not an issue. And if you don't find examples you need, again, raise them and we will attempt to provide examples as quickly as we can.
So sounds like your top tip was to find the thing on GitHub called more complex.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have in the chat any other questions at all? The last regular webinar we had a great old time with 40 odd minutes of questions that kept us on our feet. Slightly different vibe for the technical webinar. Now, it's more of a statement made in the question. If that is for shared bays, for example, warning for unloading bays, then is later used for disabled bays. JHB's nodding, I'll take that. On the subject of timings, if we issue an ETRN, anyone? Okay, if we issue an ETRN, and I look forward to finding out what that is, for a set date and time, but which is valid for up to 5 days, how do you make allowances for this in the system? In most cases, the work is completed in one night, but this is not always the case. Oh, an emergency traffic regulation notice. There we go. Ah, thank you very much, Tommy. I got there. It's just what I used to call it a temporary notice. Yeah, that was what I called it in my day. Can you pass out an answer to that, Johns, at all?
Yep. The D-TRO service is primarily trying to capture what is known within the notice, what was known within the notice or the order. So the best example is you may have a temporary TRO which specifies that a road is going to be closed, and it may specify an expectation that this is only going to be closed for 2 or 3 days, but within an 18-month period. We don't know which 2 or 3 days, and the notice doesn't say that. So when that information first comes into the service, we know what we know, which is that we know the 18-month period, and we're having the ability now, which is being added, to say, oh, and we expect it to be closed for 3 days, for example. We can't know what's not in the notice. Obviously, the real-time updating requirement that you find in the secondary legislation that is for highway authorities related to TROs goes beyond what you find in the notice, but that's a specific extension. And in the case of other ones, we don't know what we don't know, and the service won't know that. But at least as a step forward, a data consumer would know that an emergency notice existed, which would certainly be a step forward from where we are at the moment.
Thank you. That makes sense. Well, okay. Let's pause the Q&A for now, and I believe, as is traditional, Gareth Tilley has our engagement programme to take us home, and then if we do get any more questions before we close, we'll finish with them, or otherwise we will finish. Doctor.
Thank you, Paul. Here's just a flavour of the plan for engagement over the next couple of months. So always highlight the one-to-one sessions we're having with folk. They're always really, really useful and valuable for us. Date for the next technical webinar, date for your diaries, is going to be the 24th of April, and that's going to be at 3 o'clock. So I think we're keen to see if anything comes out of the new release we've been highlighting today. So we've already wanted to schedule that in. Webinar 8, that's the next general webinar. We're conscious that we're still digesting the contents of the consultation. So we're envisaging that will be in the spring, and that will probably be in May sometime, but we'll schedule that as soon as we possibly can. In person, we're going to be at the Transport Technology Conference, Transport Technology Forum, and that's on the 7th of May, and that's in Leicestershire. And we're also going to be at ITS Europe as well, and that's from the 19th to the 21st. So we've got 2 presentations on D-TRO at ITS Europe in Seville as well. So that's the engagement programme over the next couple of months. And then I just wanted to highlight, as ever, I'm sure people know this by now, but these are the kind of key channels for us. GitHub, as we've highlighted several times on this webinar, is our key for raising technical issues. It's really great because everyone can see what people are thinking and people comment on issues being raised. We've got the Transport Technology Forum. That's got a whole host of things. That's got our regular announcements and newsletters. It's got our FAQ. It's got our link to our YouTube videos, including the video of this webinar, which will be going up there shortly. And we've got basically that as a center point for all our kind of material and key material from the program. In addition, we've got the email, which is just simply dtro@dft.gov.uk. And if you need any help, any support, just reach out through that email address. Paul, that was the things I wanted to highlight here.
Thanks so much, Gareth. We haven't had any new questions to come in, which seems like a positive to me. I hope you've enjoyed that webinar, guys. Maybe see you at the Transport Technology Forum in May or somewhere else. Do pass on word of the project to colleagues that you see around. We are desperate to get the word out. Take care of yourselves and see you at the next technical webinar.
Thank you.